Chapter 4: Survey Research and Sampling. Survey is a group of research methods commonly used to determine the present status of a given phenomenon. As was just indicated, a key strength of survey research is that if properly done, it allows one to generalize from a smaller group to a larger group from which subtitle has been selected. Major differences between survey research and other methods. For example, survey research is used to gather contemporary data, while historical research is, of course, primarily concerned with past data. Types of survey studies. For example, if the purpose of the study is to formulate a problem for a more precise investigation or to develop more formal hypotheses, then a formative or exploratory type of survey may well be in order. An exploratory survey, often conducted as qualitative research, can increase the researcher's familiarity with phenomenon and questions. It can help to clarify concepts, it can be used to establish priorities for future research, it can identify new problems, and it can be used to gather information with practical applications. Although such results cannot always be anticipated, specific kinds of exploratory research surveys include literature surveys, experiences surveys, analysis of insights stimulating. Analytical and descriptive surveys. Lily describes the analytical survey method as appropriate for data that are quantitative in nature and that need statistical assistance to extract their meaning. Other types of surveys: cross-sectional study, trend study, cohort study, panel study, approximation of the longitudinal study, parallel sample study, contextual study, sociometric study, and critical incidence study. Basic purposes of descriptive study. Yet descriptive survey research, while usually less rigorous than experimental research, is stronger than exploratory research for testing relationships between variables. In gaining rigorousness, however, it tends to lose flexibility. In short, it tends to provide a compromise method for studying specific phenomena. Basic steps of survey research. Formulating objectives. The objectives should be based on the problem to be investigated or the questions to be answered. Selecting data collection techniques. Such technique as observation, interviews, and questionnaires often used, but if no suitable techniques already exist, then a new one must be devised. Selecting the sample. In deciding how representative of the total group the sample is, the researcher should consider both statistical and practical differences between the sample and total group. Collecting the data. If one is conducting a relatively large survey, there is a good chance that it will be necessary to employ one or more field workers, persons charged with actually gathering the data. Analyzing and interpreting the results. The researcher should state clearly and specifically what data are needed to resolve the problem, where they are located, and how they were obtained. Survey research designs. The most straightforward type of survey research is descriptive, and it is designed to ensure that the sample is reasonably representative of the population to which the researcher wishes to generalize and that the relevant characteristics have been accurately measured. Survey research costs shorten the length of data collection, reduce the number of follow-ups, limit pilot or pretesting to a small number of participants, shorten time spent developing data collection instruments by adapting already existing instruments, make the instrument as short as possible, use monetary incentives to encourage respondents, minimize staff costs, shop around for less expensive supplies and equipment, reduce the number of survey activities, minimize the amount of time each activity takes. Sampling is often one of the most crucial steps in survey research. In fact, rigorous sampling methods have been developed and used primarily within the content of survey research. Basic terms and concepts: universe, population stratum, element, census, sample, case, and sampling frame. Types of sampling methods. Probability sampling is the more scientific and useful of two methods. Non-probability sampling will be considered first. Non-probability sample. The researchers cannot state the probability of a specific element of the population being included in the sample. Accidental sample. The researchers might query user during some other time period and end up with quite different responses. Quota sample is the same as accidental sampling except that it takes steps to ensure that the significant diverse elements of the population are needed. Snowball sample. These types of sampling is cumulative, hence the name snowball sampling. This type of non-probability sampling is used in exploratory research since the technique can result in samples with questionable representativeness. Purposive sample. The researchers would be making the assumptions that such a sample would be reasonably typical of all university libraries involved in developing electronic reference services. Self-selected sample. A self-selected sample is a group of cases, usually people who have essentially selected themselves for inclusion in a study. Incomplete sample. Example, if a large percentage of the cases selected do not respond or participate in the study, then assurance that the sample is representative of the population is quite possibly lost, even though the sample may have been from an incomplete population list. Probability sampling. The primary purpose of sampling is to select elements that accurately represent the total population from which the elements were drawn. Sample random sample is the basic sampling method of survey research. The techniques of simple random sampling give each element in the population an equal chance of being included in the sample. Systematic sample. For example, the researchers may have a population list of 1,000 elements and divide to select every 10th element for the sample. Stratified random sample. For example, a system random sample may be drawn from one stratum and a systematic sample from another. Cluster sample. With a given total sample size, however, if the number of clusters is increased, the number of elements within a cluster must be decreased. Determining the sample size. Samples that are quite small place significant limitations on the types of statistical analysis that can be employed. Sampling error. The standard error of the mean represents how much the average of the means of an infinite number of samples drawn from a population deviates from the actual mean of that same population. Other causes sampling error. For example, if a researcher was selecting library users for an interview on library services, he or she might be inclined, if even unconsciously, to select persons who appeared to be unskilled library users or were sloppily dressed. Non-sampling error. For example, in responding to questionnaires or interview persons may lie about their age or report figures inaccurately for a variety of reasons.